The smell of fresh paint still lingered in our apartment, and it seemed to me that even the walls were absorbing this feeling of a new beginning, as if life itself had given Gaspar and me a chance to build something clean, fresh, and uniquely ours. The floors sparkled, reflecting the light of the early autumn morning that softly filtered through the large windows, and in every reflection I felt not just coziness, but the promise of a future that we were building together. I walked through the kitchen and automatically ran my palm along the smooth edge of the kitchen island, remembering how we spent hours choosing it, driving through showrooms, arguing late into the night, and then laughing at how seriously we took the little things. Every detail of this apartment bore traces of our decisions, our compromises, our dream, which at some point became a tangible reality. It was more than a place to live. It was proof that together we were capable of building an entire world. I remember well the day we signed the lease and the feeling in my chest as if I were living in someone else's dream because everything seemed so perfect. "I can't believe this is real," I confessed to Gaspar, and he, ignoring my doubts, pulled me into the empty living room and said with such confidence that it was forever etched in my memory, "Get used to it." "This is our first chapter, Daniela." A good one. I smiled because I believed him. I believed in us. But that was before his parents intervened in our story, with their eternal red pen, as if they were editing a text that was not theirs at all. The first dinner with Nestor and Laura after our engagement was not a celebration, but a real performance of passive-aggressive discontent, where every word sounded like a line honed to cold precision. Their house, a huge glass mansion on top of a hill that you couldn't get to by accident, felt less like a living space and more like a museum, where everything was on display but nothing could be touched. Even the air there seemed sterile, as if there was no room for simple human emotions. Nestor began the conversation with a question that seemed more judgmental than interested beneath the surface. "So, Daniela, your father is a doctor, isn't he?" I nodded, trying to sound calm. "Yes, my father is an orthopedist. He recently opened his own clinic." Laura, slowly blotting her lips with a napkin, asked if my mother worked with him, and I answered that my mother handled administrative and financial affairs. Her answer was dry and prickly. Interesting. I always thought that doctors' families had enough money for one parent to stay at home. I gritted my teeth and said that my mother liked her job, but the aftertaste was already there. Nestor poured some wine and, as if throwing a dice to test, added, "Or maybe your father's practice is not as profitable as we assumed." I felt Gaspar tense next to me. He said impulsively, "Papa, that's enough." But Nestor only raised his palm as if he were setting the rules of the game and said, "This is not a judgment, son. Just curiosity. You are getting married too and becoming part of her family." I sat with a forced smile, measuring every movement, the way I picked up my fork, the way I nodded, the way I chewed my food, and inside I felt that I had not been invited to dinner, but summoned for interrogation. Only in the car, when we were alone, I allowed myself to exhale. It was not dinner. It was an interrogation. Gaspar tried to soften, said, "They just want to understand you better." "You are important to me," but I couldn't help but smile bitterly. Then why do I feel like I just blew an interview? 2 weeks later, when I was deep in preparation for an important client presentation at my firm, the concierge unexpectedly called, "Miss, a team of movers has arrived to deliver your furniture." I replied, confused, that I hadn't ordered anything, and my heart began to pound. When I returned home, I froze in the doorway. Our apartment was no longer ours. In place of clean lines and space were pale pink armchairs, gauzy curtains, a giant gilded mirror, a velvet sofa so heavy and ornate that you could faint on it, but not live in the 21st century. In the center of all this absurdity stood Gaspard, his mouth open and his eyes empty. "It's not us," he whispered. And then there was a knock on the door. Nestor and Laura walked in, beaming, as if they were showing us a gift from fate. "Surprise!" Laura sang, as if they were talking about a bouquet of flowers and not about a revolution in our lives. "We thought you'd have a head start on setting up the wedding suite," Nestor added, pointing pointedly at the furniture. "Did you have all this custom made?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral with difficulty. "Imported Italian handcraft," he explained proudly. I took a breath and said, "But we already picked out the furniture." Laura sighed with theatrical ease. "Your taste is too minimalist. We just wanted to elevate the aesthetic. You're family now." Gaspar stepped forward, trying to sound firm. "Mom, you should have at least asked us." But Laura just waved her hand. "It was a gift." "You're welcome." 3 days later, I received a bill. $21,480 in my name. No payment plan, no notice, not Gaspar, not a gift. I politely brought it up at breakfast. "Nestor, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't afford this furniture, and I didn't order it." He leaned back in his chair, his fork hovering in midair. "Do you think I would have billed you if I didn't expect you to pay?" "We've made your life better. Try saying thank you." I looked at Gaspar and saw him lowering his eyes. It only got worse from there. As the wedding approached, Laura showed up more and more often, once with new throw pillows, another to inspect the carpet, a third to replace our doormat with one that had Bennett embroidered on it. I hadn't even changed my last name yet, and she was already fitting me into someone else's family. Each visit was accompanied by comments. "That dress might ruin you. Maybe you should skip the vows and read instead. Don't let your father talk too much. He likes to talk." I clenched my teeth to keep from answering, and literally bit my tongue until it bled. But on the morning of the wedding, my patience was exhausted. I was standing in front of the mirror in the bridal suite, adjusting my simple, elegant, sleeveless dress, when the door swung open without knocking, and Laura walked in. Her gaze slid over my reflection, and the corners of her lips twitched in a condescending smile. "Well, you look better than I expected." I remained silent, but she did not stop. "Let's keep things under control today. No unnecessary speeches from your father, no dramatic words about courage and loyalty." I turned to her sharply. "Excuse me?" Her eyebrows rose in defiance. I took a step closer. "This is my wedding, not an exhibition in your gallery. You have no right to control my words and my emotions." Her smile disappeared. I continued, my heart pounding in my chest. "If you and Nestor want a silent bride, you've chosen the wrong woman." I smiled and nodded and paid your bills. I let you rearrange my apartment, my time, even my wedding. But that's where I draw the line. The air between us grew thick, almost palpable. Laura hissed, "Don't test me, Daniela." I straightened up and replied, "I've already." And you know what? I passed. She slammed the door so hard the mirror shook, and I was left in a hollow silence, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the realization that for the first time in all this time, I had said exactly what I was supposed to say. The ceremony was beautiful only on the surface, like a carefully staged performance, with every detail thought out to the smallest stroke. And yet somewhere between the golden leaves that swirled softly in the autumn wind and the soft music of the violins pouring out over the garden, I felt the cold presence of something wrong, hidden behind the perfect picture. The rows of guests smiled, looked with tenderness and approval, and Gaspar and I said our vows under an arch decorated with eucalyptus and roses. And although everything looked perfect, too perfect, it seemed to me as if there was a tension in the air that no one dared to name. Gaspar squeezed my hand a little tighter than was necessary for a symbol of support, and I noticed that Laura did not smile the entire time. Her gaze was prickly and wary, while Nestor, on the contrary, sat motionless, as if waiting for something, like a conductor ready to give the orchestra a signal. But I stubbornly pushed these thoughts away, telling myself that this was our day, that I loved Gaspar, and that nothing else mattered, that even their coldness could not spoil what was important to us. The reception began lively, glasses clinked, Waiters carried champagne, light music played, and it seemed that now it was finally possible to exhale. But at the moment when the orchestra played the second song, the microphone clicked, and Nestor, standing in the center of the room, raised his glass. His smile was practiced, and his voice cut through the space so sharply that everyone immediately fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to celebrate the union of my son Gaspar and his fiancée Daniela," he said, and there was a rare applause, dry like his words. I exhaled, trying to relieve the tension, but then he continued, "Before we all get too carried away, I have an obligation to share something that matters to the future of our family." I frowned, feeling Gaspard's hand tighten in mine, and Nestor said with predatory calm, "The wedding may be today, but I believe that Gaspard's true match is another woman. Her name is Simone." The name hit me like a slap. The room fell silent. The guests looked at each other. Some gasped, others tried to laugh, thinking it was a joke, but everything around them became viscous, like a dream. I turned to Gaspar, his eyes narrowed in confusion. "Who?" he whispered. Nestor continued without pause, as if he had prepared every word in advance. "Simone is intelligent, refined, compassionate. I personally organized their meetings. She is a wonderful woman, and after today's formality, I hope that Gaspard will consider what is best for his future and for the company." Laura beamed smugly, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. I caught my breath. I couldn't breathe or speak. I only heard the whispers of the guests, like the rustling of many hands. "You knew?" I squeezed out. My voice was alien, hoarse. Gaspar turned to me, his eyes wide with panic. "No, Daniela, I swear to God, I don't know what he's talking about." But Nestor grinned, leaning towards the microphone. "Don't be modest, son. We've already talked about this." Gaspar jumped up, his voice cutting through the air. "No, we didn't do that. And by the way, Simone is my father's assistant. I've never even had coffee with her." His words sounded firm, but the room was filled with murmurs, doubts. Nestor replied coldly, "That's enough." And at that moment, Gaspar reached for the microphone, but before he could touch it, a figure I recognized instantly rose from the back of the room. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a dark gray suit strode through the crowd, and people parted to make way for him. It was my father. His face was unreadable as he walked onto the stage, stood next to Nestor, and took the microphone without asking. He didn't need to raise his voice. His calm tone cut through the room, which instantly fell silent. "You've said enough, Nestor. Now let me correct the recording." Nestor raised his head, surprised, and asked coldly, "Who are you?" "I'm Daniela's father," my father replied evenly. "And unlike you, I came here to support my daughter, not to ruin her wedding." Someone in the room gasped. Someone began to whisper. Laura rolled her eyes, but my father continued, "That woman you kept talking about, Simone, is not just your employee. She is my daughter." A wave of shock swept through the guests, and I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. "What?" Laura cried. Nestor, on the other hand, seemed to perk up, his smug mask wavering. My father nodded. "Yes, Simone is Daniela's half-sister from my first marriage, and I find it disgusting that you, knowing nothing about her, would try to arrange a marriage between her and my son-in-law." I swallowed, the blood rushing in my ears. Simone was my sister. I remembered hearing her name once in a casual conversation between my father, a daughter born long before me, but I had never met her and assumed she lived somewhere far away or did not want to communicate. My father looked at me more gently. "Daniela, I didn't tell you because we lost contact many years ago, but we recently re-established it. She came to me worried that this man was pressuring her, promising her marriage and wealth that she never asked for." His finger pointed directly at Nestor. The hubbub grew louder, the guests whispered, exchanged glances. He found her resume in the business archives, showed up at her house uninvited, told her that she was better than the woman his son would marry, and promised her status. I looked at Gaspar, his face paled, as if he himself could not believe what he had heard. My father's voice dropped. She refused repeatedly. But he did not stop, and now he has decided to humiliate both my daughters in public. The words echoed through the room like a death sentence. Laura jumped up, her voice sharp. "You're making this up to distract from the fact that Daniela—" But her father raised his hand, cutting her off. "Simone provided evidence. Texts, letters, dates. She left your company last week." Nestor stepped forward and snatched the microphone back, his eyes blazing with anger. "Even if she is your daughter, that doesn't prove anything." "Where is the evidence?" My father reached into the pocket of his perfectly pressed jacket and pulled out a thick sealed envelope, as if he had prepared himself for the fact that his words would have to be backed up not only by his voice, but also by the weight of documentary truth. He held it up for all to see and said calmly, but in a way that every word sank into the ears of the guests, "Family court documents. DNA testing. Copies will be in your company's HR department by morning." The room was silent, broken only by the pounding of my heart. Gaspar turned sharply to my father, his voice almost desperate. "Is it true?" Nestor remained silent, but the clenched jaw that gave him away was more eloquent than any words. I looked down at my wedding ring, at the thin metal band that only a few hours ago had seemed a symbol of eternity, and now became a reminder of the fragility of any oath. "I knew we'd have to wait," Laura muttered under her breath, as if she were justifying herself to no one else. But then she raised her head and said loudly, "It doesn't matter. The apartment is ready. Even if Simone doesn't want to live in it, we will. The apartment is in Gaspar's name. We are a family." My father looked at me, and I nodded once, feeling a shudder run through my entire body. Then he turned to the room, and his voice was firm and clear. "That's not true. I built this house, I paid for it in full, and I left it to my daughter as a wedding present." A mixture of anger and disbelief appeared on Nestor's face, and he blurted out, "That's impossible. You're not a builder. You're a doctor." "I'm not just a doctor," my father interrupted. "I'm a business owner. And do you know, Nestor, that most of your construction contracts come from my clinic and the projects associated with it?" The room fell into such silence that I heard a spoon clink against a glass somewhere in the back row. My father leaned forward slightly and added in a tone that sent shivers down my spine, "As of today, those contracts are under review." Nestor's face turned white, his lips trembled, and Laura, standing next to him, whispered something incoherent, barely able to stand on her feet from rage. Gaspar, on the contrary, sat motionless, as if everything that was happening had been a blow to him from which he could not recover. I looked around the room, where dozens of eyes darted from one face to another, guests hiding their gaze behind linen napkins or whispering to each other, as if they did not know whether to rejoice at the revelation or fear the coming scandal. And suddenly, right at the entrance, I saw her. A woman with thick chestnut hair and surprisingly bright green eyes. She wore a simple slate blue dress that emphasized her fragility. She stood quietly, like a shadow, but the moment our eyes met, I saw in her not hatred, but sadness and a strange, painful familiarity. The air in the reception room grew thick, as if a thunderstorm were about to break right here, and every whisper of the guests sounded louder than usual. Laura was the first to emerge from this tense silence. "So what?" she spat out like poison. "Even if this girl, Simone." "What difference does it make? The house is ready, furnished, and if she doesn't want to live there, Nestor and I will. It's our home." She turned sharply to Gaspar and said in a tone that sent shivers down my spine, "You'll see how practical it is. There's no point in letting such a beautiful house go to waste." Gaspar blinked, as if awakening from a bad dream. "Wait. "So we're going to live there?" he asked, his voice filled with pure horror. Nestor stepped forward, his voice booming, stripped of its politeness. "Of course. We've already sold our house, Gaspar. This property is our next chapter, yours and ours. Today is a wedding, a nice formality, but real life is next. Heritage, structure, order." He looked around the room theatrically as if expecting applause and continued. "This house is a symbol of the future, and if Simone is not part of it, then Laura and I will take our rightful place." What impudence, I thought, feeling my blood boil. Never in my life had I encountered such arrogance. Gaspar frowned, his voice wavering. "Are you saying you're going to live with us?" Laura responded with a soft, thin smile that was more like a grin. "Darling, don't be naive. We've been building this family for 20 years, and we're not going to let some stranger destroy it." I stepped closer, the words bursting out like fire. "Stop talking like I'm a stranger. You interfered in everything. My wedding, my apartment, my life, and now you're trying to appropriate a house that you have nothing to do with." Nestor chuckled coldly. "Your father is a doctor, not a developer. Do you really think we'll believe this fairy tale about a gift?" I turned to my father, and he stepped forward, his voice quiet but each word falling like a stone. "I didn't just give her a house. I built it. I spent years investing, planning, and creating, and unlike some people, I don't have to bark to prove my worth." Nestor snorted. "So what now? Are you going to hold our contracts hostage to your daughter's feelings?" My father smiled faintly. "No, I'm protecting my daughter and my business. If that means cutting ties with untrustworthy partners, so be it." Then a voice came from behind. "He's not alone." All heads turned to the tall man who stood up from the table. "I'm on the board of Halden Realty, and if this is how weddings are held in your family, I'm not about to risk a multi-million-dollar contract." A woman stood up from across the room. "We were looking at a deal with Bennett Construction next quarter." "Perhaps we can return to this discussion later." The room buzzed like a forest fire. Words passed from ear to ear, and I saw Nestor's face grow pale, his lips tremble, his eyes dart about. He lunged for the microphone again, but now his movements were desperate, almost convulsive. "Everyone just calm down," Nestor muttered, grabbing the microphone as if it were his last weapon. "This is a personal misunderstanding that has nothing to do with business." But everyone knew it was too late, since he himself had turned everything into a public spectacle as soon as he took the floor in front of the guests. "You made it public," my father interrupted firmly, and there was no doubt in his voice, only the tired dignity of a man who had watched someone else's impudence for too long. Gaspar glanced at my parents, at me, and finally at Simone, who was still standing by the door, motionless as a shadow, but so tangible that everyone in the room felt her presence. He stepped forward and said in a level voice, in which not a single note trembled, "I trust my wife." My breath caught in my throat, as if someone had loosened the invisible chains around my chest. Gaspar turned completely to Nestor, and his face, usually soft, was now stony. "You lied to me. You tried to ruin our marriage before it even began. And for what? For a prettier assistant? For a woman who, in your opinion, was more suitable for your plans? You didn't even realize that you wanted to set me up with my wife's sister." "What?" Laura gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, as if she wanted to stifle her own reaction. "Watch your tone." "No," Gaspar replied sharply. "Mind your own." The room was so silent that I heard someone drop a fork on a plate in the far corner. Gaspar took my hand and whispered so quietly that only I heard, "I'm sorry. For not getting up sooner. For letting them tear you down." Us, I nodded briefly, feeling tears welling up in my eyes but holding them back, because this was not a moment for weakness, but a moment of truth. Gaspar then returned to the room and, looking my father straight in the face, said firmly, "Starting today, I am starting the restructuring of Bennett Construction. My parents are retiring indefinitely. Nestor's eyes widened and he exhaled sharply. You can't! I've already spoken to the board, Gaspar replied calmly. They've seen the numbers. They know you've been gone for months, missed deadlines, failed to deliver on contracts. After tonight, I don't think they'll need any more convincing. Laura looked around in panic, her eyes darting around the room, looking for anyone who would take her side. You're ruining everything because of her, she shouted, pointing at me. No, Gaspar said coldly. You ruined everything yourself. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. At that moment, Simone stepped forward and all eyes turned to her. I never wanted this, she said quietly, but her voice was as clear as a bell. I didn't come here to make a scene. I came here to support my sister, once I realized who she was. She looked straight at me, her eyes shining with suppressed tears. I didn't know you when I was little, and I always wondered why. I thought you didn't want to know me. But the truth is, we were both pawns in someone else's game. I swallowed and answered, barely audible. You did nothing wrong. I let them pull me into their web. When our father told me what was happening, I was scared, she continued. I wanted to just pack my things and disappear, so as not to interfere. But then I realized, if I left, they would continue to do this to you or to someone else. She turned sharply to Nestor and Laura, and for the first time that evening, her voice was firm. You can't use people like chess pieces. You don't belong in this family, Laura hissed. No, Simone answered calmly, but you don't either. After these words, it was all over. The guests began to rise from their seats. Some headed for the exit. Others came up to us to shake hands, hug, or just support us with a look. Even those who did not dare to say anything completely avoided meeting Nestor and Laura's eyes, as if they were afraid of being infected by their poison. Nestor made a last pathetic attempt. It was just a misunderstanding, son. But Gaspar did not answer. He was already holding my hand and we were leaving. A month later, exactly 2 weeks after the wedding, Nestor officially resigned from the company. Most of the clients turned away from him, and Bennett Construction found itself under the leadership of Gaspar, who managed to breathe new life into the project in a short time, restore trust and confidence. My father never gloated, but when he once showed me a framed architectural sketch of the house, the very first drawing made especially for me, I noticed a quiet, deeply hidden pride in his eyes. Simone stayed in town. She didn't go back to work with Gaspar, but she found a new job as a freelance designer, a quiet life and a steady income. We started over, coffee, then lunch, then an awkward but warm dinner. And then one evening, Gaspar and I invited her into our house. She walked through the front door as if she'd returned to a place she'd never been before. I can't believe it's true, she whispered, running her fingers over the bookshelves. Neither do I replied and added, smiling. But I'm glad you're here. Her eyes lit up with a soft glow. Sometimes the people you lose when you're young find their way back into your life when you least expect it. And sometimes the chaos that almost destroys everything ends up making you whole.